Is it working?
I think so.
Hello.
Yep.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's meeting of the Communications Security, Reliability, and Interoperability Council. And I can see everybody's out making merry today, and hopefully they're on the bridge anyway. But for those of you that are here, welcome, and well, for those of you on the phone, thank you for joining us as well. Today, we have 3 reports for a vote. 2 from Working Group 2 on reimagining alerting. The first is an amendment to the report that was voted in September. The language that is new was in red line in the draft that I sent around for everybody to look at prior to this meeting. And the second report is on security of the emergency alerting system, and that content is all new. The third report that we'll vote on today is from Working Group 3, and it is an addendum on supply chain risk. It's an addendum to the report that you voted in September. And so there's some new language. The report that you got in draft just has that new language, so it was a very short addendum. So welcome again, and I'll turn it over now to Brian King, our chair.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks again for making it in. And if you didn't make it in on the phone, it's a really sunny day here today. So if you're anticipating snow, it's actually a beautiful day here in Washington, D.C. I've made a note of the folks in the room, so I just want to take some roll call from folks on the phone, please. So if we can try and do that just to make sure we have a good quorum here today. So if you're out there on the phone, I know Mary, I believe you're out there telephonically.
Yes, sir. Mary Boyd, West Safety's here. Thank you.
Okay, and anybody else out there?
Tim Walden with CenturyLink.
Hey, Tim.
Kevin Gage with One Media.
Kevin?
Jill Canfield for Shirley Bloomfield, NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association.
Hi.
Dorothy Spears with the Commonwealth of Virginia.
Don Birmingham, Verizon.
Hey, Dawn. Anyone else? Okay, I think we're good to roll.
Hey, this is Dan Henry from Nina.
Hey, Dan.
Charlotte Field from Charter.
Gotcha. Okay, so thanks for that. And so with that, we'll get right into the agenda. As Jeff said, we've got Farouk with us in the room today. If you're ready, Farouk. So Farouk's got 2 updates for us. One, as Jeff said, an amendment to the previous report. And we'll go through that first, and then we'll take a vote on that amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll wait for the presentation to show up. Thank you very much. So this is a report on, on Working Group 2, and this is an amendment to the emergency alerting that we had last time. In a way of background, you may recall that once we completed the previous report, there was enough motivation and energy in the group to ask for additional work for extra points. So we requested from FCC, and FCC kindly granted us the additional work that is highlighted in the red sentence for the amendment to the reporting. So this is the report of that. So this slide shows the Working Group 2 members. Yeah. Yes. and you can, if you can read it, you have much better eyes than I do. And I also want to, acknowledge the fact that we had also alternates that helped with the work. And even this time, we had a number of subject matter experts that were not neither the alternates or subject matter expert. They were not voting members. But without their help, we couldn't have progress to work. So we really appreciated all the time and effort. I mean, there were times that we had 4 calls in a week to get the work progress and completed. So without their help, we couldn't have done this thing. So I really want to thank them, and I have an acknowledgement at the end again. But in the way of background, we really want to make sure that emergency information is sent in a critical time, in a secured way. And the EAS in specific play a very critical role in disseminating life-saving information. But there are some improvements, if you will, we can do to help EAS. And the focus of this amendment was to what are the particular enhancements that we can do to EAS to make it better. So we started with doing some examining of some of the open issues that we had previously in section 6.3 of previous report, and came up with some new recommendations and formulated a roadmap to help those implementation in both EAS and CAP to be done. So what are the aspects of it? Let's go a little bit more detail on it. So one of the issues that we talked about was leveraging some CAP data not currently available in native EAS to be used. And some of them may include, for example, rich media. Having rich media in EAS, it's potentially very useful. Improving audio quality. That was another aspect. Polygon-based location, we have that in VIA now. EAS may be useful to have that polygon-based location. Authentication of messages via digital certification. And I actually go through this a little bit more on my next one on the security aspects. So that aspects, we thought that it was important to highlight. How to do message cancellation, and multiple languages. It's becoming more and more important to make sure that multiple languages are considered. So those are some of the issues that we dive into it more. So here are some of the issues, clarification on how these things can be done. The clarification on how emergency alert notifications are to be processed. That it's important that the relationship between the EAN is considered very clearly. Buffering real-time EAN alert audio. That was a very good discussion that happened, and you can see there's a lot more detail going on that describes what we are trying to do. And this report is so much more detailed than what I'm presenting to you right now, because I don't want to spend a lot of time. But if you let me, I would probably spend an hour just going through the details. I'm one of the technology nerding, so I'll keep it at a high level for now. But this buffering of real-time EAN alert audio was one of the important ones. And streaming audio for EAN was another topic that we discussed quite a bit in the group. And additional received headers during processing of alert was discussed quite a bit. And finally, duplication alert message detection. That was one of the issues that actually I found it pretty interesting, and had to do with also how alert maybe even goes across different distribution technology. So this whole duplication detection, message detection, is something that we really want to make sure that we consider that a lot more detail. And finally, ensure that an EAS alert is only retransmitted during its valid process. And we will go through a little bit more detail, because that also has some security aspects with respect to rebroadcasting. We want to make sure that it doesn't get trapped and then rebroadcast at the wrong time. So there's a lot of these things have also some security aspects. So there's some overlap between them. But this retransmission was one of the issues that we will also discuss it more during the security aspects. So summary of recommendations, and as I said, this is just a pure amendment on the EAS aspect, so you can see only there are very few recommendations. So one of the recommendations that we did, that enhance EAS so that EAS participant can leverage with CAP content not currently contained in the EAS message format defined by FCC Part 11. So I'm reading it very precisely, because every one of these we were very precise on how we word it. So I'm not paraphrasing as much on the recommendation. I want to make sure that I capture it exactly as written on the report. So that was one of the recommendations. And EAN should employ the simplest possible dissemination methodology. That was another one that, after all the discussion, was one of the conclusions that we must make. So I think that there is one more recommendation, and this is, there are a lot of acronyms there, so I make sure that I include the acronym list on the bottom because, sometimes we use these acronyms and we believe everyone in the world knows it, and that's not the case.
We love them.
We love them. We meaning us that we are in the business and technology. So one of the recommendations that we made, so need to evaluate the desirability of retaining EAS FSK in its current state, trying to extend it to include some new features regarding EAN, NPT, RMT, RWT, acronym, but there's an acronym list on the bottom. Changing the transmission format to increase data throughput or dropping the analog system entirely and accepting an internet or internet augmented with satellite or other suitable technologies solutions. Mouthful, but again, it was one of those things that we had a good discussion on it, and we thought that it would be good to have that. So before I go to personal note, maybe this is a good place to pause and ask the commission, or please accept this.
Yeah, before we take that to a vote, I mean, just if there are questions in the room, please, the drill, raise tent card. Or if there are questions out on the phone, we have a majority out on the phone today, so. The only question I had, Farouk, was around the language piece, and would that be subscription? How would that be administered?
So the language, in the way we are doing in NVIDIA, for example, is that we will provide as many languages. For example, we have English and Spanish available, and then the user has the ability to select what language they would like to have it presented. So that's how we are doing NVIDIA, and I would imagine EAS would be the same, that multiple languages would be available to the end user, and the end user device would be able to select which device.
Okay, thank you. So once again, any questions out there for Farouk? Otherwise, we'll move to a vote for that as amended. Thank you, Farouk, and that working group team. So in the room, if you can, just raise your hand as well. You vote, so all those in favor? Okay, it's unanimous in the room. On the phone, just say aye, please.
Aye.
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 Okay, any other votes out there against? All right, it's approved, Farouk. Congratulations.
Thank you. And I didn't go through the acknowledgement, but I will go through the thank you on the next one because it's the same slide, because I think it's really important to acknowledge the effort that groups put into it. So maybe we can, Susan, would it be okay if we go to the next presentation? Very good. Wow, you guys are ahead of me. So let me explain what this thing is. So remember that we had two different reports that we were going to do. So the first report was on reimagining the technology, and the second part was how do we improve the security aspects, especially we were focusing on the security aspects of EAS. So the highlighted yellow is the subject of our second report that I will present right now. And we had a very lively discussion on the subject. And again, I really appreciate the folks who were very much involved in the activity. So that's the report that we will go through it. I will not bore you with the working group members and alternates, and thank you. I'm going to say thank you so many times you're going to get sick of it. But let's go through the background information. So as we mentioned, it's critical that we will send the alerts in a timely fashion, and as important, and this is the reason why I've underscored the insecure manner, security is very important as well. I mean, you want to make sure that the information that gets out is very secure. So authentication of EAS through things like digital signature, and we'll go through it a little bit more what that means. For internet-based iPods as well as and cap, and also for the make sure that the presentation of the broadcast as well as the cap messages are done. And this was actually very interesting in the discussion here because there was actually an FCC recommendation came out, amendment to Part 11 of the Commission that was about timely during our discussion, and there were some questions specifically asked of us, CSRIC 6, to answer. So we attempted to answer some of those questions too. So the timing was actually pretty good. So let's go through that without any further ado. So what are the different types of alerts? I thought maybe it would be interesting just go through some of those. So what are the potential false EAS that you could get some little bit of background. You can get, for example, false EAS from an authorized source. So, there is generated by person or persons. This happened in Hawaii case. And if you're not familiar with the Hawaii case, we actually have a footnote and description of, you can go look, that basically it was an authorized person who issued it. So that's one potential source of false EAS. And it could be automated cross-platform software. Software sends a message in an error. There was a case of tsunami warning from a non-EAS source that came across, or the test was misconfigured. So it was supposed to be a test, it was misconfigured. So that's one potential source of false EAS. And the conclusion we were discussing, and the box down there talks about it. They said no changes in EAS protocol will help in this case. We cannot have a protocol necessary to change the person if the person insists on sending a wrong one. But we can do some stuff to protect it. But this particular change of protocol may not help this issue. Then there's another issue of be able to send the EAS from an unauthorized access to authorization location. So if there's a potential that maybe the alert can be sent from an unauthorized person, and there's actually a case on it. So that parenthesis zombie, I'm not trying to scare you. There's actually a case, we call it a zombie case because it's basically, and again, it's really fascinating just going and reading about it, and we have references to it. So there is a situation that this specific false EAS happened. Again, no changes to the EAS protocol will help this case, but identification, mitigation, including maintaining sensitive equipment behind a firewall protection, or changing, normal IT stuff, changing your default password, maintaining a strong password policy, things like that definitely could help mitigate this issue. So we just want to point out that these are potential cases of a false alert. Another scenario is a replay, and this replay actually, we have some really interesting recommendation on that as well. So the valid alert was sent first, but it's now resent outside of its valid date. So let's say that there was a valid alert came out and somebody somehow captured it, recorded it, and resent it outside its valid date. It may not be intentional case known. We don't know if intentionally somebody tried to do it, but it can happen. Valid alert we send outside of its valid date does not fit inside that's our day, hour, and so forth. The original message. There is a case on the second one, we call it the Bobby Bones case. And as I said, some people, they just say Bobby Bones and everybody knows about it. But if you don't know about it, don't feel bad about it. I didn't know about it until I read about it. So it's a replay of a situation. So again, this is another situation that the intent of mitigation for replay event is to keep other EAS participants from relaying the alert. So you played it once, you don't want to relay it again. The replay alert still appears on the source where it can cause audience confusion. You replay and you say, oh, wait a second, this isn't a real alert, so the audience can get confused. So that was another potential false alert. Audience confusion is another one. In this situation, audio presented to the audience that sounds like an alert. So that could be, but it's really not an alert. It sounds like one. Affects listener, but it's not relayed. So it's not none of the one previously we discussed, but this is potential and a source of alert. So again, no change to the EAS protocol will help in this particular. All right, so, there's one more, alert from unauthorized source, not person, authorized source. And this has a little bit two parts to it, CAP and EAS, and following slide goes a little bit more detail on it. On the CAP side, you have a spoof CAP message that somehow make their way through the FEMA iPods open system, or are presented to an EAS participant from a system presented to the iPod system, or from a legitimate third-party source. So there is a situation where this could happen through some legitimate source as well. The group conducted analysis of this CAP authentication, validity, and the source of digital certificate and security. And this I will describe a little bit more detail in the next slide, the next couple of slides. And also, the unauthorized could be the EAS, use of some type of digital signature, and we'll talk about what that means as a remedy to a secured EAS. The group conducted analysis of EAS security and included some advantages, costs, risks. So we did that analysis in our report. All right, so with that said, let's take a look at this. I said I go a little bit more detail on this thing. So let's take a look at least in the case of broadcast EAS authentication. So the first bullet is a requirement for internet access to verify signature. And the discussion was very interesting because, you don't always have internet connection, right? Sometimes in an emergency situation, you may lose your internet connection. So we needed to make sure that the solution that we have doesn't necessarily rely 100% on internet availability. So it is both, you can have a download of a public key, for example, offline so that you have it, certificates, there are some potential options that we have. But we want to make sure that, you get a certificate or you download your certificate, there's an expiration associated with it, so you're not good for always, and you can send whatever you want. So that's with respect to the first bullet. The second bullet, background on EAS headers and same protocols, and we went more detailed discussion on that. The next one is inserting a digital signature into the EAS header. So first, I got to point out, and this one of our group members asked to make sure that when we say digital signature, even though it's capital digital and capital S, but we really don't mean any specific, we mean digital signature as a whole. So not a one specific. So we really want to make sure that the EAS header has some kind of signature associated, not one particular, but that needs to be discussed. But having some kind of signature on the EAS header is very important to make sure that it's done correctly. Next one, and I discussed it before, additional concept for EAS message is two concepts that we discussed is that one EAS message can be enhanced through inclusion of year. So right now we don't have year. We have the months and date, but not the year aspect because the justification was, well, okay, you know what, they're probably not going to go over 1 year and replay. But the fact is that it could happen, so having that year, and FCC actually in their the document that is submitted, they said, well, we know about it, but we are not going to include the year. But I think we believe that year may be actually important to include, even though the risk is lower. The second concept we discussed, EAS security can be potentially enhanced through a repurposing of station ID element. And we had that discussion with FCC. We were asking, how do you get the station ID and so forth? So that's another aspect that we wanted to discuss. But one thing that I want to point out, both concept 1 and concept 2 play a role on the replay. When you do the replay, like if you replay and the year is wrong and so forth, that protects the replay. There are other security that may not protect, but these two definitely are important for replay aspect. The last one is alternative method of inserting additional data into the EAS header. Things like extending the header, we discussed that. Adding data into the audio portion. adding additional headers or repurposing existing fields. So those were all described, and I'm reading it because we actually had those little details in our report, so I just want to make sure that we captured those additional elements. So with that said, so this is all background. Let's go through some of the recommendations that we made. So the first recommendation is all CAP messages that are intended for transmission as EAS messaging must have a valid digital signature. Again, we're talking about generic digital, but it should have a valid digital signature, so that it's secure. Another one, the Commission should evaluate whether digitally signed CAP messages processed by EAS participants should only rely on digital certificate issued by FEMA IPOS, relying on the federal PKI and chain of trust, both of them. And their discussion was, you can have, this is compared to allowing alternate, like for example, from state, territorial, tribal, local digital certificate source. So it should be FEMA IPOS only, or you should allow for that. And that's still an open issue that needs further discussion and further talk.
So just to clarify
Sure.
that's not a full recommendation, that's a recommendation, but also further discussion?
Yes, that's correct. And actually, I have actually captured that thought on the last item as well. So then the next one is additional investigation. And again, this investigation, given our limited time and all the, we couldn't go to too detailed inside, but we captured the framework of what really needs to be done, and it requires next level of diving deep into and doing it. So the other one is additional investigation be conducted onto the use of digital signature, as we mentioned, as a solution to AS security, comparing risk versus cost. So a lot of this security doesn't come for free. There is always a cost associated with it, whether you do digital signature, bits added, and so forth. So we are transmitting very valuable bits. So it doesn't come for free, but it's important to have it. So it's a cost-benefit thing. You can make it a lot longer, the signature and so forth, but there is a cost associated with that. So it's always a risk-reward kind of analysis. So we believe that it's extremely important to have the security, but there is a mitigation you have to do between cost and risk. The next one is additional investigation be conducted into technical or system impact, if any, to allowing the usage of embedded audio files in the CAP alert message. So we found that embedding audio CAP actually is a good one, but again, that has, it takes part of the overall information that you're sending. So it has a cost associated with it, but we need to investigate and understand that what is the cost and how important that is. And this is the last recommendation, and this goes back to the question you were saying. That, the previous district, they had also a recommendation, and we went through those recommendations as well. So in general, we believe that the Commission should encourage with its federal and industry partners to evaluate the technical feasibility and system impact of solution discussed by the working group as well as the previous one. So this is not the end, but this is basically creating a framework that we can use for future. So I'm going to actually do this my personal note, thank you, because last time I missed it. But if you don't mind, before we go to questions, then I really would like to thank Working Group 2 members and alternate and SMEs for doing an excellent job. I mean, I've said it before, without the group's effort, input, 4 calls a week, hundreds of emails a day, this work could not happen. So it's very, very important for me to thank them. Also, I would like to thank ATIS for providing a tool that would help us disseminate the information. You can still go to the, check every email that was sent, check every document that was submitted. To me, that's very important to have that captured. Susan Miller here, that she help that. We really appreciate ATIS, and I think that goes across all the working groups. And finally, my last sentence on this aspect is that it was my privilege to chair CSRIC 6, Working Group 2. It was really, I've been working on VIA for many years, but EAS was a little bit newer to me. I learned a lot, and it was a very enjoyable task. So I would like to thank you for that privilege. So, Mr. Chair, with that, maybe we can ask to see if there are any questions.
Let's open up for questions for Farouk, if we have any in the room. Okay. Oh, sorry, Edward.
Not a question, but a comment. I wanted to thank Farouk for his remarkably adept handling of an extremely dynamic and contentious group of professionals. That we could not have generated either report without your steering of the ship. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ed.
Any other questions out there for Farouk? So, I mean, I'd like to say thank you too, Farouk. I think it's been fascinating, but it sounds like from your presentation, it's not the end, it's the beginning, or the end of the beginning, as it was.
Or beginning of the end, no?
Yeah.
I can never tell which one.
Yeah, it's the end of the beginning, I think, for you, based on some of the recommendations. So no doubt you'll be involved in this subject for quite some time. So thank you very much for all of the great work. With that, we'll open up for a vote again on the recommendations from Farouk and Working Group 2. So in the room, we'll do a show of hands again, please. All those in favor? Okay, unanimous in the room again. Thank you. And on the phone, say aye.
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 Okay, I only counted 2. Everybody else on mute?
I put the rest in.
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. No, they're not asleep. They're very well disciplined out there. They're talking to the mute key, so I appreciate that. And any nays out there? Also check the mute key. Okay, that's also passed. So thank you very much, Farouk, and thank you every one of the council members on Working Group 2.
Thank you.
So next up, we have Working Group 3 updates. We've got an amendment there from Travis and the Working Group 2 team, and a general update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am certainly glad that I braved the blizzards of North Carolina to find the sunshine here in D.C. As Jimmy Buffett would say, the weather was here. I wish you were. So this is an addendum to the report that we issued back in September. If you look at the deliverables that this group has, we submitted back in September our report on 5G risks, vulnerabilities, and there was a section there that we came back to revisit, and that's the section that I will address today. We voted on the report for the exception of the recommendations around supply chain, and so the vote today will be around that addendum to the full report. So first let me start by saying that 5G is really a moving machine right now. We are still years away from fully defined standards. So there's a lot of things that are in motion right now. And it's, I think we've just scratched the surface to date. And most certainly we'll have to come back and revisit this continuously because there's a lot of things that are in motion today. And I think will continue to be in motion over the next 12 to 18 months. Our first recommendation here to the FCC was that if there was a decision here for regulatory action on supply chain risk management based upon responses to the current NPRM on the restriction of the use of USF funds, that should be focused as narrowly as possible to alleviate or prevent any broader impacts across the supply chain. And we also recommend that the Commission consider the ongoing work within both DHS and NIST prior to any other actions. There's a lot of work currently happening there, and I strongly encourage not just following that, but also participating in that. And we also, our other recommendation was to support NIST and their CSF update to supply chain procedures. We recommend that the FCC support the NIST with a collaborative process to define these voluntary procedures and to identify some informed references for inclusion in those updates to the cybersecurity framework. The other recommendation that we make to the Commission, and I won't go through all of the paragraph here, but we recommend that the Commission, as well as other agencies and even the legislators, allow some time for both the public and the private partnerships that are going through today and making assessments around supply chain risk management to get through those assessments so that we can provide a more informative assessment for future discussion prior to any regulatory actions. And we advocate the FCC participate. Sorry. We also, is that on the right slide there?
You want one more?
Sorry. There we go. So we also recommend that the FCC participate in the ICT Scrum task force just to make sure that we have the best possible flow of information between all of these diverse participants, the industry, the FCC. Sorry for being behind on the slides there. I keep pushing buttons and nothing happens. There we go. As far as the industry is concerned, I think I mentioned this when we submitted the 5G report earlier in September. When we talk about industry, one recommendation when we say industry, let's keep in mind that that is both the service providers as well as the vendor community, because there is a tremendous amount of expertise in both of those sectors, in both of those groups. So we want to make sure that we include both the vendor community as well as the service providers. So this recommendation is more collaboration with the DHS and the newly formed ICT Scrum Task Force in support of the National Risk Management Center. We also recommend that all industry members implement supply chain risk management policy for the management of their supply chain relationships. The onus on this, by the way, really falls on the vendors just as much as it does service providers, because obviously vendors, we get components from a lot of different places. So there's a lot of onus on the vendor community for this especially. And we further recommend that the industry consider utilizing, and I love this term, distributed ledger technology. And this is the new way of saying blockchain, within their process to address various Scrum activities, including the proof of ownership, traceability, and transparency when sharing this information. And you're starting to see that, I think, now. I think we've gotten past the snickers whenever blockchain comes up. There's some rather interesting utilization of blockchain for supply chain management that are actually going through implementations now. When it comes to evaluation of supply chain risks,
Lag again.
well, I'm glad I got you here to keep me honest.
Useful for something.
When it comes to the evaluation of supply chain risks, we recommend the continued use of the NVD, the NIST National Vulnerability Database. That includes the CVE, as well as Common Vulnerability Scoring System, or the CVSS. For the categorization and scoring of vulnerabilities in the supply chain. And those are the recommendations that are up for vote today.
Okay.
Mr. Chair?
Any questions for Travis and the working group team in the room? And on the phone, again, I'll prompt you for the mute key. You guys are really well disciplined out there. I just, personally thank you just for taking a deeper dive in this. I know, as you said, it's still a real moving target, and things are still evolving at pace, I think, from a 5G perspective. So thank you for, all the extra work, and thank you to the working group members who basically went through this twice, and I appreciate that. It's really good outcome in terms of the recommendations. So with that, I'll put that up for a vote. Again, in the room, raise of hands if you're in favor of those recommendations. Okay, unanimous again. And then on the phone with the mute key off.
Aye.
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 Okay, and any nays out there? All right, it's approved. Thank you, Travis. Thank you, T.
Thank you.
So next up from Travis, you have an update on
I do.
everything else you're working on.
On everything else we're working on, and we're not quite done. There we go.
Thanks, Susan.
So the next deliverable that we have is to focus on the recommendations to mitigate security risks to current IP-based protocols. And so when we started looking at this, IP-based protocols can be a pretty broad topic in and of itself. But given the current things that are going on in the world and in networks in general, it felt good and right timing to begin looking at DNS and the BGP protocol again. There was quite a bit of work already done on this, and so what this working group wanted to do is to go back and review the work from previous CSRICs, I think that was working group, or CSRIC 3, working group 6 and 4, I believe it was. The work that they did, both with the DNS network, as well as the work and recommendations they made for the Border Gateway Protocol. We talked about adding the SIP protocol, but we feel that in order to really do that one justice, there's a lot to talk about around the SIP protocol. There's so many things to do with the SIP protocol that we felt that it really needed a report by itself to do it justice. So SIP is not a part of this report. We kept it very focused on DNS and the BGP. So it's work in progress. We have been hearing from some SMEs. So we've heard from Doug Montgomery from NIST. We thank him very much for his presentation. Tail Lawrence from Oracle Dyn. Dyn is a DNS provider, so these guys are on the front lines, and some of the stuff that they have seen has been pretty incredible. So Tail is actually a part of that whole investigative group there at Dyn that's looking at the traffic, that's doing analysis, and is actually seeing some of these things that you saw in the media. Obviously, I'll get to that in a minute. And plus, we have several working group members who are active working in DNS networks and with the BGP protocol. So to give you a little bit of background, I mean, every time you type in a URL, the Universal Resource Locator, I'm glad Brian is here to keep me honest with this clicker. Maybe you should run that.
You're watching there. I'm watching there. You're good.
Anytime you type in a URL, that address cannot be routed across the internet. It has to be translated into an IP address, and that's the job of the domain name system. And it's a hierarchical network, so there's a lot of different hierarchy that's here, and all of that gets run by this protocol that's called the Border Gateway Protocol, which, by the way, has been around for quite a long time. And so when DNS was first developed, as with other technologies we have seen in our industry, it was not designed with security in mind. And so we are seeing things happening today, although a lot of the things that we see happening are most likely just clerical errors, administrative errors. You probably saw in the media there was the recent coverage about traffic being rerouted to China. That actually happened, but whether or not it was intentional or accidental, it's more likely that it was just bad administration putting in new routing addresses. And the way that this protocol works with what's called peer discovery, it actually will advertise all of the IP addresses that it can connect to. So if you make a mistake, you put something in there wrong, you could alter the routing of the entire internet. And so we see these instances happening actually more often than not. So we're still trudging through these things. We are reviewing the work of the previous CSRIC, as I mentioned. And what we're doing there is identifying, what were their recommendations? Are there any gaps, things that they did not recommend that, looking at today's current climate, is there some things, some new recommendations that possibly we should add into there? And of course, we're doing this on a weekly conference call. And we will probably have a few more SMEs come in to address the group. We're looking at a couple of different areas that we're going to ask for SMEs. There is a mistake here on this schedule. Thank you, Suzanne, for pointing out cut and paste is not always the greatest thing.
I wish I'd seen it earlier, sorry.
That's all right. So we will, on February the 21st, that is our target for submitting our draft report on DNS BGP. And then, of course, March 21st, we will have the final copy of that report. So in the meantime, we're going to continue forward. We'll take a short break through the holidays. I'll let the working group take a day or two off, and then we'll be hard at it again. And then we'll submit this in February.
Okay. Thanks, Travis. Thank you, and thank you to, yeah.
Travis, back in when CSRIC 3, I think it was like 2011, 2012, and what was on our minds most back then was DNSSEC, Secure BGP, BGPSEC, right?
Yeah.
And the idea of some sort of an incremental migration from legacy interdomain routing and naming protocols to a more secure environment.
Yeah.
And so the conundrum years ago, maybe not so much in 2011, but was the sort of Flag Day problem where, you can't make a change to BGP without everybody doing it at the same time.
Right.
And so one of the things I'm curious about, and maybe you and your team can look into, is has progress been made on that so that now it's possible to be thinking about more incremental approaches to better securing the interdomain routing infrastructure and the naming infrastructure that aren't so aren't so dramatic. And so,
Yeah, we're looking into that now on both DNSSEC as well as now the discussions are on RPKI. And so we're trying to understand the implications of both DNSSEC and RPKI in today's networks.
good.
But yeah, that's definitely one of the considerations.
Okay.
Any other questions out there for Travis and working group team?
Right.
Anything on the phone? All right, thanks, Travis.
Thank you.
So next on our agenda, I think we have a virtual Mary Boyd, if you're out there today, to give us a Working Group 1 update. If not, we have your stunt double ready in the room.
Well, and my stunt double is a fine one. So thank you, Mr. Chairman, for accommodating my virtual participation. Mother Nature is handing us a storm that would have impacted me getting back. So I appreciate all your understanding. And Budge Courier, thank you for being there as backup in case I lose power here in a minute. This report for Work Group 1, Suzanne, if you can help me with slides.
Yep, just say click.
And if you'll just kind of go to the objective slide. It's just so for the CSRIC group that's in D.C., there's a little bit of a delay between Conference Bridge Voice and the video link. So I'll try to be a really good Texan and talk slow to get caught up with the slides. But the objectives for work Group 1, I'll remind this team, we are focused on next generation 911. Our challenge was, our charter was to look at improving both legacy 911 and NG 911 and recommend ways to further the transition to next gen with a heavy focus on mitigating risk and outages on those networks. I'll remind you and go over our membership just quickly, Suzanne, if you don't mind.
Okay.
We have 23 members on the work group. Like Farouk, I want to not only recognize the members of this working group, but also our subject matter experts that have been with us through thick and thin. The assignment we're going to report on right now was heavily supported by subject matter experts, and we will be adding some additional ones I'll talk about in just a second. But I would be remiss if I did not call out and recognize the support that we get from David Firth and John Healy. John has been wonderful to guide us through our current work deliverable on best practices. And I'd also like to thank ADIS as well for the support of their network and systems, because like Farouk's team, we rely on ADIS and being able to archive and work within our documents. So thank you, guys. So Suzanne, if you don't mind, let's go to the update slide on our additional assignment on best practices. We have completed our other deliverables within our charter. We volunteered to take on an additional assignment, which included evaluation of all of the existing best practices. I did go back and did a little research. I think it was CSRIC 3 where an entire evaluation of the best practices was conducted, and some additional categories were created 5 or 6 years ago. So as we looked at evaluating the 1,116 best practices, we identified in that second bullet 215 of the existing best practices that needed some amendment. Now, not to scare those who do this all the time, a lot of the changes in the existing best practices that we will propose are really related to expanding the industry role. That was done back in CSRIC 3. We've gone back in that review and identified some existing ones that really needed to have public safety added to it based on the changes that's happened in the industry. And so in our final report, we'll review the ones that have been redlined and give you a summary. Some of them just dealt with network types that had to be modified. So, but we will include those in our report. I'd also like to point out, just for the individuals who work in best practices, we've partnered with John Healy in the Commission's format for tracking of the best practices. We've redlined. Thank you, Tom Breen, for being the gentleman who has done all the heavy lifting from Comtech on the tracking documents. But we will redline so it'll be easy to determine where we're making proposed changes. So there's 215 to the existing, and then I am very pleased to announce that we have finalized the development of the new best practices, and we're really working in format right now. But we will bring to the council 40, that is 40, proposed new best practices related to next generation 911. And those deal with elements such as points of interconnect, network security and protection. There's elements about validation for there's data best practices specific to next generation 911, as well as diversity and redundancy, and then training recommendations with the best practices. So we had hoped to have finished this work and be overachievers. However, this has been a lot of work, and I think bringing in 40 specific to next gen is quite a lot of work, and quite credit to the team that's been engaged in this. And then the one that we still have under review is this last bullet, and that's make recommendations on any standards. That's still under review if we'll need any additional standards based on our recommendations. So if you don't mind to go to the next slide, please. Okay. And this is sort of where our next steps are in this initiative. As we've reviewed and developed the drafts, we're going to, as I understand from the Commission, we're going to do a first. I met with the NRSC, the ADIS Network Reliability and Steering Council, last week, and they have a committee that works with the Commission in reviewing best practices. Oftentimes that's done after the CSRIC has concluded their recommendations. We're going to parallel and bring on the NRSC subject matter experts on that committee and have them start reviewing our proposed recommendations on the new BPs in January. Andy Gormley from T-Mobile chairs that work group, and he's agreed to bring in his team. So, John Healy, if you're in the room, we are starting that initiative. So, Mr. Chairman, when we conclude our recommendations, it will have had the review and support of the Addis NRSC. And then we will continue our work. Butch Courier, feel free to jump in here. But we're like, Travis, we're giving folks a break from now to the end of the year for holidays, and then we'll pick our work up again at the 1st of January. And then on this next slide, and the last slide I'll review is just a reminder that we did complete our task 1, which was the report that identifies all the network elements in the transition. Task 2 was the checklist for rural carriers as they migrate. And then we'll conclude in the spring, in March, our best practice work. Budge, did I miss anything? You want to add anything to the report?
No, Mary, that sounds like a pretty good summary. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Yeah, we do have the great John Healy in the room with us today, so he's hiding at the back
Thank
there.
you.
So thanks for all your
Hopefully
work on
there's
that, John. Sorry, Mary, I talked over you.
No, sir, I'm sorry. I think I talked over you. I was just going to say, hopefully John has a smile on his face that we have this path, this parallel path forward. So,
Yeah, he looks happy.
can I answer any questions, Mr. Chairman, to our update?
Anyone in the room have questions for Mary? I think stay warm, I think, is probably the message from the room here. Any questions on the phone for Mary or the working group? Sounds like not. So with that, Jeff, I'll hand over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Brian. Farouk, first, where did Farouk go?
He's here.
There he is. I'm sorry, I missed you. First of all, I wanted to thank you myself and for the commission for all the work you did and for closing out the work of Working Group 2. And you've done a great job, as well, Travis, as well as you and Mary. Appreciate you being here and delivering these reports and updates. And also recognize, as I try to do every time, all of the work of the working group members, sort of the force multiplier behind all the things that you're doing. I mean, there's, at one point I've counted tens or there's at least tens, probably hundreds of people behind all this work. So thank you for putting the time and energy into this. So I will ask you all to go out and enjoy the city if you're here. For a holiday season, it's nice out here, and where you are, enjoy that too. Mary, stay inside and avoid flying objects, I think, as the winds pick up. And
You're getting the same
that's
message
right.
from both sides.
Yes, I know the message. The next meeting, we just scheduled it today. We just scheduled the final meeting of the CSRIC 6. It's March 29th, Friday, and it'll be in the afternoon as well as this one is. So please get home safe. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, guys. Happy holidays.